They told me I was family, right before they shoved me out the door. That's how my story starts. Not with a layoff email, not with a handshake, but with betrayal dressed as budget cuts. My name's Evan Miles, and until 6 months ago, I was the operations manager at Brightcore Electronics, a mid-sized tech firm in Austin that prided itself on people first. Yeah, I believed that line. For 5 years, I gave that company everything. Late nights, weekends, ideas that saved them hundreds of thousands. I wasn't just good at my job. I loved it. I believed in what we were building. I believed in Mark, my boss, my mentor, the guy who once told me, "You've got the kind of loyalty money can't buy." I thought we were a team. Mark was the kind of leader you'd follow into a burning building. Charismatic. Sharp. Always had your back. When he talked, people listened. And when he said we're like family, I believed it. Maybe that's why it hit so hard when the walls started cracking. It began small whispers in the break room, tighter budgets, quiet meetings behind glass doors. HR started using words like restructuring and streamlining. But I wasn't worried. I just pulled off a massive contract optimization that saved Brightcore nearly $250,000 in annual costs. I thought I was safe. Protected. Then one Friday, Mark called me into his office. He didn't look me in the eye. "Evan," he said, his voice flat, "corporate's making cuts. I fought for you, I really did. But your position's being eliminated." Eliminated. That's the word they use when they don't have the guts to say we don't want you anymore. I laughed. Actually laughed. Because I thought it was a joke. I reminded him of the savings, the systems I built, the team I led. But he just sighed, slid a folder across the desk, and said, "It's not personal." That's when I knew something was wrong. He avoided eye contact. His hands were shaking. And when I glanced at the termination letter, I noticed something odd, the signature line. It wasn't corporate's name. It was his. He'd signed off on it personally. I walked out of that office with a cardboard box and a forced smile, while he clapped me on the shoulder and said, "You'll land on your feet." But as I passed my team's cubicles, I noticed something that chilled me. A new guy setting up at my desk. My desk. And that's when the first flicker of suspicion hit. Maybe I wasn't fired to save money. Maybe someone was trying to make it. For a week after the firing, I told myself it was just business. That's what Mark said, right? It's not personal. But it felt personal. The first red flag showed up 2 days later. An email. Not to me, obviously. I wasn't part of Brightcore anymore. But one of my old teammates, Jenna, sent me a message that started with, "Hey, I probably shouldn't be saying this, but..." Attached was a screenshot of an internal memo, something about project realignment and contract reallocation. My name was right there, crossed out in red. And next to it, a new name. Darren Cole. The same guy who'd been sitting at my desk when I left. I remembered him, a consultant Mark had brought in a few months earlier to help optimize vendor strategy. He'd been friendly enough, though there was something slick about him. The kind of guy who wore $800 shoes but couldn't remember anyone's birthday. In the memo, Darren's new title was Senior Operations Strategist. My old job. But with a 20% salary bump. So much for budget cuts. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe corporate changed their mind. Maybe Mark's hands were tied. But then Jenna said something that twisted my stomach. They said your position was redundant, but Darren's signing off on your old vendor contracts, the ones you optimized. He's taking credit for them. That was the second red flag. I stared at my screen for a long time, trying to swallow the bitterness. Every instinct screamed to call Mark, to demand an explanation. But then I remembered how he'd avoided eye contact. The tremor in his hands. The forced, "You'll land on your feet." Still, I needed to believe there was a reason. A misunderstanding. So, I showed up at the office. Just for a friendly visit. Security almost didn't let me in, until I flashed my old badge like it still meant something. The lobby looked the same polished floors, same fake smiles. But the moment I stepped through the glass doors, the air changed. Conversations stopped. Eyes dropped to desks. Mark's office door was closed, blinds drawn. Through the glass, I saw Darren sitting across from him. They were laughing, clinking coffee mugs. I waited until Darren left. Then I knocked. Mark opened the door, surprise flickering, then quickly buried under a practiced smile. Evan. Wow, hey, good to see you. What brings you here? I just wanted to say thanks, I lied. For everything. He nodded, but his jaw tightened. His eyes darted to the hallway. Of course. Take care of yourself, okay? His hand shook again, just slightly, as he closed the door. And as I turned to leave, I caught sight of a folder on his desk. The label read, Vendor Reallocation. Confidential. Under it, in small print, my signature. You ever feel your stomach drop before your mind catches up? That's what happened the moment I saw my own signature on that folder in Mark's office. The next day, I couldn't let it go. I sat in my apartment surrounded by cardboard boxes, my whole career packed away, replaying everything in my head. The promotions, the praise, the We're Family speeches. Every memory now felt like a setup. So I did what I do best. I started digging. Jenna still had access to the internal database, so I asked for one last favor. She hesitated but eventually sent me a few files, vendor invoices, contract revisions, payment logs. That's when the betrayal took shape, line by line, number by number. They hadn't fired me to save money. They'd fired me to steal it. Mark and Darren had re-signed 3 of my biggest vendor contracts under Darren's name. Same companies, same terms, except for one detail: inflated service fees. Hidden kickbacks routed through shell accounts. I traced the payments, not to Bright Core, but to a consulting firm Mark recommended months before the layoffs. The firm's registration address? Mark's home. My heart sank so hard it almost made me sick. The man I looked up to, the one who'd promised I had a future there, had used me as cover. He'd waited until I optimized the system, made it airtight, and then replaced me with someone who knew how to exploit it. I was the loyal fool who built the vault. He was the one who robbed it. The worst part. The company bought the lie. Budget cuts. Restructuring. All while Mark lined his pockets with the same money I'd saved them. I remember sitting there, staring at the numbers glowing on my laptop screen, feeling everything collapse. Trust, pride, identity. It wasn't just a job he'd taken from me. It was the years I'd spent believing that loyalty still meant something. I wanted to scream. To march into that office and throw the proof in his face. But something inside me shifted instead. The rage didn't explode. It crystallized. Cold. Focused. I closed the laptop, the glow reflecting off the photo on my desk, me and Mark at last year's company retreat, grinning like father and son. I turned it face down. If they fired me to save money, they were about to learn how expensive that decision really was. I didn't know how yet. But I knew this. They'd taken everything I'd built. And I was going to make them pay, one ledger line at a time. The room went silent. Then, for the first time since it all began, I smiled. The night I uncovered the truth, I didn't sleep. I sat there in the dark, laptop open, files scattered across my floor like debris after an explosion. Every number was a reminder, of trust broken, of years stolen. My chest felt hollow, like someone had carved out everything that made me me and left nothing but noise. By sunrise, I was still staring at the same spreadsheet, eyes burning, mind numb. I thought about calling HR. About going public. But deep down, I knew what would happen. Corporate would circle the wagons, Mark would spin another story, and I'd be the disgruntled ex-employee. They'd win again. That thought broke me. I buried my face in my hands, shaking, not from anger anymore, but from exhaustion. I'd spent my whole career believing that hard work and loyalty meant something. Now I realized I was just another tool in someone else's game. Then my phone buzzed. It was a photo, from Jenna. No message, just the image. It was from the company's LinkedIn page, a smiling post about Brightcore's exciting new leadership initiatives, featuring Mark and Darren side by side, holding an oversized check. The caption read, "Honoring our cost-saving heroes, innovation through efficiency." Cost-saving heroes. That phrase hit me like a slap. I stared at the photo until my jaw hurt from clenching it. They hadn't just taken my job, they'd celebrated it. They'd stood on the ashes of my career and called it progress. And that's when something inside me snapped. The fear, the self-pity, the disbelief, it all burned away, leaving only clarity. They thought they'd erased me, that I'd disappear quietly. But they'd underestimated the one thing I'd always been best at, understanding how the system worked. I knew every contract, every vendor, every loophole. And more importantly, I knew how to expose them without leaving a trace. I took a deep breath, wiped my face, and started over. Organized the files. Labeled everything. Built a private drive. Line by line, I mapped out the fraud in a way no auditor could ignore. It wasn't revenge yet, it was preparation. But it felt like power. For the first time in weeks, I stood up straight. My hands stopped shaking. I looked in the mirror, and the man staring back wasn't broken anymore. He was patient. Calculating. Mark once told me, loyalty is priceless. He was wrong. It had a price, and he was about to pay it in full. I closed my laptop and whispered the vow that would carry me through the storm ahead. You took my career to save money. Now I'll take your empire to make it right. And for the first time, I actually meant it. Revenge isn't a movie montage. It's spreadsheets, patience, and tiny invisible moves that add up until the whole thing collapses. I learned that fast. I went through every file Jenna could pull. Contract versions, amendment dates, payment trails. I rebuilt the timeline, when each vendor was re-signed, who approved the changes, and which accounts received the payments. I cross-checked invoices with public filings and dug up vendor registrations until the shell companies unraveled like bad sewing. Every odd signature, every midnight edit, every redirected wire had a place on my map. Jenna was in, scared but steady. She fed me internal memos and saved copies of anything that hit the server after I left. A former vendor contact, Luis, quietly confirmed the sudden fee hikes and sent me copies of stamped receipts showing services never rendered. I found an old friend at a boutique forensic accounting firm who owed me one. He agreed to a discreet review if I fronted the minimal cost. Alone, numbers look like noise. With corroboration, they become a story. They'd already pegged me as the disgruntled ex. I built a clean digital footprint. New email addresses, burner phones for calls, shadow folders stored on encrypted drives. No one could trace the first whispers back to me. In this game, anonymity was a shield and a weapon. Mark and Darren still acted like nothing was wrong. They posted selfies with oversized checks and efficiency accolades while the company network hummed around them. I let them. I seeded a controlled leak, an anonymous tip to a minor business reporter about discrepancies in Brightcore's vendor spending. It would draw attention, but not enough for the board to panic. I needed them to relax, to double down, to make the next mistake. Corporate thrives on stories. We cut costs responsibly. I prepared an alternative. A tidy packet for the board, assembled with care. Timelines, forged, but provable. Internal approvals showing Darren as the originator of the changes. Vendor statements from Luis. A forensic snapshot from my friend highlighting the shell accounts. I also prepared a separate breadcrumb trail for the public. A concise, irrefutable dossier for the reporter that would make headlines and force regulators to look closer. Every move was surgical. No shouting. No threats. Just pressure applied until something, one ledger, one audit, cracked. With each step I felt the old Evan fall away. The new Evan moved like a predator who had learned how to be invisible. Quieter, smarter, and more dangerous. I slept in short bursts and woke with lists in my head. I rehearsed contingencies. If the board called an emergency meeting, I had a plan. If Mark tried to scramble funds, I had an alert ready with Luis and my accountant friend. The final piece was the timing. I picked a date when Bright Core was publicly announcing its quarterly results, when the market and the board would be watching the numbers most closely. If my packet hit then, the fallout would be immediate and public. I sat back, fingers steepled, and watched the calendar flip to the week I'd chosen. The phone in my pocket buzzed with a message from Jenna. They're presenting Q3 next Tuesday. Everything's ready. I smiled without warmth. The countdown had begun. They applauded their quarterly numbers that Tuesday like it was victory. Conference room full, cameras rolling. Mark beamed from the podium while Darren stood beside him, grinning like the future had already been bought. Brightcore's PR script had been polished for months. Efficiency, innovation, doing more with less. The world ate it up. Then the world got the packet. The reporter's story ran at 9:03 a.m., a concise, surgical takedown of every glossy claim. Headline: Brightcore's cost-cutting heroes linked to multi-million vendor scheme. The article walked the reader through my timeline: re-signed contracts, inflated fees, shell vendors, and the trail of payments leading not to a consulting firm but to Mark's address. It quoted Luis. It quoted the forensic snapshot. It quoted anonymous sources inside the company. It demanded answers. Within an hour, the board convened. Within 2, regulatory eyes were on Brightcore. An independent auditor froze accounts tied to the suspicious vendors. The stock dropped like glass. Mark's face went white. He fumbled his prepared remarks, pages fluttering to the floor. Darren's grin dissolved into a mask of panic. They tried to dismiss it as an internal misunderstanding. They tried to laugh it off. But laughter dies fast when subpoenas land. The board put them on leave, immediate, unpaid, pending investigation. Cameras circled the building like vultures. Journalists called their numbers. Investors called the board. Vendors who'd tolerated questionable invoices suddenly demanded audits. Darren, who loved airports and fast exits, was stopped at security the next day when an alert flagged his name for suspicious transfers. Law enforcement led him away in a blue jacket while he shouted about misunderstandings. Video of him being escorted out played on loop. Mark had no dramatic arrest. He had something worse: exposure. The stories that had once made him king, mentorship, loyalty, the family narrative, became the angles reporters used to show his hypocrisy. His neighbors recognized his name in the filings. Old colleagues who had defended him publicly now texted legal counsel. His wife's friends called. The man who'd once asked me to trust him found the doors closed. The board stripped his office. Photographs of company retreats were removed from the lobby. The nameplate on Mark's door, Mark Whitman, VP Operations, was taken down and placed in a cardboard box beside a half-emptied plant. He sat in his car in the parking garage for almost an hour afterward, hands on the steering wheel, phone dark, while the newsroom outside screamed for a comment he couldn't give. I watched it all from a bench 2 blocks away, a coffee gone cold in my hands. I felt the old fury, but it was quieter now, a heavy, steady thing. There was no gloating shout. There was a private, simple satisfaction. The ledger had balanced. As Darren was led into a courthouse lobby under the glare of cameras, and as Mark's name was unceremoniously removed from the company website, the hollowness those men had created began to echo back on them. Greed had bought them everything, and then evaporated it, leaving only exposure and silence. When the newsroom quieted and the last camera packed away, I folded my hands and let the silence fill me. It matched the silence that had followed my first dismissal, but this time it belonged to them. For a long moment there was nothing but the low hum of the city and the soft click of a nameplate being taped into a file marked evidence. Then, almost involuntarily, I smiled. Not because I'd won, but because justice, slow, patient, precise, had finally arrived. You said. The storm ended quietly. No explosions, no handcuffs clinking in my ears, just the steady unraveling of everything Mark had built on lies. Within 3 months, Brightcore's board had removed half its leadership team. Mark's consulting shell was dissolved by court order. Darren, now under investigation, flipped to save himself. His testimony sealed Mark's fate. The final number was Poetic. $4.8 million in losses and fines. $4.8 million, the same amount I'd saved the company in my last year there. He'd fired me to save money. He cost them almost 5 times what I was worth. When the dust settled, I didn't feel the rush I'd imagined. Just a deep, hollow calm, the kind that comes after you've cried out every drop of anger. For a while, I drifted. No job, no plan, just space. But sometimes space is where you start to heal. Jenna found another company, one that valued integrity more than slogans. She wanted me to join, but I wasn't ready yet. I needed to remember who I was before I let bitterness define me. So I went back to the beginning, to the part of me that used to love solving problems, not just exposing them. I started consulting small businesses, teaching them how to protect themselves from the kind of fraud that almost destroyed me. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like someone's pawn. One afternoon, while cleaning out old files, I found the photo of Mark and me from the company retreat, the one I'd turned face down months ago. I picked it up, stared at it for a while, then laughed softly. The smiles looked fake now, painted on over cracks I'd been too blind to see. I shredded it, piece by piece, and let the strips fall into the trash. The past didn't deserve to live rent-free in my memory anymore. That night, I sat by the window with a notebook and wrote down a single line. Not for anyone else, just for me. They tried to erase me to save money. Instead, they wrote my name into their downfall. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was balance. And when the next sunrise broke over the skyline, it didn't look like victory. It looked like peace. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? A boss, a friend, someone who called you family until they didn't? Tell me your story in the comments. I read every single one, because stories like ours deserve to be heard. And if you want more tales of betrayal, justice, and redemption, hit subscribe. The next story starts where this one ends.